Well, good morning, Sarasota Christian Church family. It is so good to be here with you guys this morning. Hey, if you've got a boat or scuba gear, really glad you guys could join us in person this morning. And if you're tuning in online, really glad you guys could join us as well. Really thankful for the technology that allows us to be able to worship together. You know, I'm excited to share next week we start a new series called The End is Near? ? And it's going to be a fun discussion on the end times. And no, we're not going to prophesy on what specific date Jesus is planning to come back on. Sorry. But I think it will be a good study for us together. And I want to encourage you maybe to even consider inviting someone to join us. We know 2020 has been a weird year, and it's definitely on people's minds, right? And so this will be a great study, and I'm super excited to do that. So this week, though, we will be wrapping up our series on pursuing Jesus. I'm excited to wrap that up this morning. But before we do that, before we dive into God's Word, I want us to pray and invite God to be a part of this time. So let's pray together. God, we just thank you that you love us, God, that you pursued us, and you were willing to do what it took to reach us. Thank you for your love, for your sacrifice. And God, thank you for your word. It is so good. And we know that in it there is life-giving messages. And Father, I just pray that today you would go out before us, that you would stir our hearts to action as we read your message today. Pray that this is not my message, but it is your message. We pray all this in the strong and powerful name of Jesus. And together as a church family, we say, amen. So fall semester of my junior year of college, I was sitting at a coffee shop that I visited probably 5 to 6 nights every single week. And the school that I went to, the town that I grew up in, was pretty small. And so it's not to say that I knew everybody in town or in my school, but when you go visit a coffee shop in a small town like that, 5 or 6 nights a week, everyone tends to look at least pretty familiar. So that night I'm studying when I hear the bell ring and the door to the coffee shop swings open, and in steps this really pretty girl. And I just remember thinking, you know, she's really beautiful. And I don't think I've seen her before. She doesn't look familiar to me. You know, and that was pretty much it. No interaction, just kind of had that thought. And then about 6 months later, the next semester, I had some friends approach me, and they said, Brandon, we've got this girl that we want you to date. And I really wasn't in a frame of mind to be pursuing a dating relationship with someone, but curiosity got the best of me, and so I said, well, who is it? And so they pulled up this girl's Facebook page that they wanted me to date, and believe it or not, it was the girl from the coffee shop. It was coffee shop girl. And so needless to say, even though I wasn't super just in this zone to be dating someone, that piqued my interest. And from that day forward, I began to pursue this girl. And that didn't really work out, so then I married my wife. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You guys can probably see where this is going, otherwise I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. I began to pursue this girl whose name at the time was Annette Suffrage. And it took several months of us just getting together, meeting with friends, and then eventually, you know, going to dinner by ourselves, going to watch movies and going to parks, before eventually we started a dating relationship. Now, I got to tell you something about this dating relationship between Annette and myself. I did things that I did not want to do in my pursuit of this girl. For example, she took me to a middle of nowhere podunk community center to go country two-step dancing. And I just thought that it would only be right if I showed you my amazing two-step dancing skills. So sound booth, if we could just go ahead and play the music. I guess we're having technical issues there. Sorry, guys. I mean, I was going to do this two-stepping for you and show you my amazing dance skills. No, if you need to know anything about me, I am not a dancer. right? Last message that I preached was on dance music, right? And I kind of shared that with you guys. I am not a dancer, and I'm probably going to step on some toes here, but I'm really not a fan of country music either. I'm sorry, I know. But I was in pursuit of this girl. And it's not to say that she forced me most days. And it's not to say that I was dishonest in my pursuit. She knew that I was not a country music fan. She knew that dancing was certainly not a skill set I had, and she knew that country two-step dancing was especially not really something I was very passionate about. But in my pursuit of this girl, who, if you don't know, did eventually become my wife, there were these action steps that I took to pursue her. You know, the word pursue is a word that you're going to hear a lot around here at Sarasota Christian Church. I mean, after all, we want to be a church that is pursuing Jesus as he transforms lives. Pursuing Jesus as he transforms lives. And we believe that there are these actionable things that we can do, these behaviors that if we do them, we will be in pursuit of Jesus. And I've got some really good news for you all today. Thankfully, none of those actionable items are going country two-step dancing. Hallelujah, right? We call these actionable items, these behaviors, our 5 pursuits. Action items that we want to see everyone who calls this church home. Action items that we want to see everyone practicing in hopes that it will deepen their pursuit of Jesus. And if you were here last week or tuned in online with us last week, our lead pastor, Todd, mentioned 2 things, that if we could just remember 2 things from this entire lesson series, right? One of those things that he mentioned was the idea behind the word pursuit. Pursuit is a word that is all about movement. Pursuit is a word that's all about movement, and we want to see everyone moving towards Jesus. And so over the last couple of weeks in this Pursue series, we've been talking about these different behaviors, these different action steps that we can take to pursuing Jesus. And so we talked about worship, the pursuit of worship, seeking growth daily. We talked about the pursuit of belong, finding a family. We talked about the pursuit of serve, using our gifts. And we also talked about the pursuit of giving in such a way that we are remembering who it is that provides. And then last week, we talked about the pursuit of invite, sharing the message of Jesus. All of these are actionable behaviors that drive us deeper in our pursuit of Jesus. Pursuit is all about movement. And then the second thing that Todd wanted us to remember from the series was the reason that we pursue Jesus. And the reason that we pursue Jesus is because he pursued us first. And we've already fleshed this out deeper in this series. If you want to know more about this, you can go back to the very first message in this series. You can find it on our website or on YouTube. But just by way of reminder, we pursued Jesus because he first pursued us. Philippians 2 really lays this out well, and just by way of summary, tells us that Jesus was ruling and reigning in heaven as king. And as king, he had all the rights and the privileges and the freedoms of a king, and yet he loved us and pursued us and disrobed from his glory to come and walk in our shoes, to live as a servant and to die a death that he did not deserve, to give us a life that we could never earn. 1 John 4:19 puts it simply like this: we love, why? We love because he first loved us. And we call this the good news of Jesus, or maybe to use a more churchy word, we call this the gospel. And it is in the gospel that we see love in action. In the gospel message of Jesus, we see love in action. Now, don't miss this, church, because this very idea is going to impact the rest of our message. This very idea is going to impact the story that we're going to read in God's Word this morning. We see Jesus in pursuit of us. And in that pursuit, we see love in action. Recently, in my own personal Bible study time, I've been reading the book of Acts to see what the early church was like, how they started, what things were important to them, what issues did they run into, and how did they solve those issues. And as I studied this book, I came across an interesting story. It's one that I'd read before, but there were some details that jumped out at me this time around. And in light of those new details, I read this story, and it really took me aback. And it's not left me since. And so I want us to look at this story together. I want to share this story with you. This morning we're going to be in Acts chapter 15 and 16. But before we do that, let me just kind of catch you up to speed on what's happened up to this point in the book of Acts. You've got these followers of Jesus who were tasked with spreading the gospel message to the whole world. And these followers of Jesus were Jews, and Jews had very strict laws and regulations regarding their worship of God. We call this the Old Covenant of God. And then Jesus comes onto the scene, and he fulfills those regulations and those laws, and he implements a new covenant, the covenant of his blood. And so now you've got all of these Jews who are converting to Christ, and then eventually the doors open to allow these Gentiles, that is non-Jews, these Gentiles now can come and be a part of this new covenant in the blood of Jesus as well. And so now you've got these two totally different people groups, these two totally different cultures that are coming together in the early church, and you can imagine the clashing that would have taken place as they're trying to all figure out this whole new covenant life together. And so then we pick up our story in Acts 15, verse 1. Some men came down from Judea and began to teach the brothers, "Unless you are circumcised according to the custom prescribed by Moses, you cannot be saved." Okay. See right there, you've got these Jewish men coming into the church and teaching the church that they have to be circumcised in order to be saved. Kids, ask your parents. Circumcision was an old covenant idea, right? It was this old covenant idea that was not reestablished in the new covenant of Jesus. So we've got this issue. Let's see how the early church handles this. Acts 15, verse 2. After Paul and Barnabas had engaged them in serious argument and debate, Paul and Barnabas and some others were appointed to go up to the apostles and elders in Jerusalem about this issue. So we've got this issue that's coming up in the church, and Paul and Barnabas are going to meet with these other church leaders, the other elders and apostles. They're going to meet them in Jerusalem to talk about this issue. We call this the Jerusalem Council. And it's in this council meeting they're trying to answer the question, is circumcision and following the old covenant, the old law of Moses, still a requirement for people to follow Jesus? And as you continue to read this story, you see even during the council meeting, we see people standing up saying, no, the Gentiles must be circumcised. But after much debate, James, the brother of Jesus, concludes this way. Picking up in verses 19 through 21. Therefore, James says, in my judgment, we should not cause difficulties for those among the Gentiles who turn to God. What does that mean? It means the Gentiles don't have to be circumcised or follow the old covenant law of Moses. Verse 20. But instead, we should write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from eating anything that has been strangled, and from blood. For since ancient times, Moses has had those who proclaim him in every city, and every Sabbath day he is read aloud in the synagogues. Okay, so we've got our verdict. right? A verdict has been reached. And so the church leaders decide that it would be best for them to write this letter and share it among all the churches. And in this letter, they say that this was both their decision and the decision of the Holy Spirit. And that decision was not to burden the Gentiles with such things such as Old Covenant law and circumcision. And just as a reminder, this letter has the weight and the authority of the Holy Spirit, number one, and number two, from the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem. Okay, pretty clear, right? It makes sense. Well, let's see what happens next. A little time passes, and then we get to Acts chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. The apostle Paul went on to Derbe and Lystra, where there was a disciple named Timothy, the son of a believing Jewish woman, but his father was Greek. The brothers and sisters at Lystra and Iconium spoke highly of him. And Paul wanted Timothy to go with him. Where does Paul want Timothy to go with him, you ask? Great question. I'm glad you asked. Look at verse 4. As they, that is Paul and Timothy, as they traveled through the towns, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders at Jerusalem for the people to observe. Okay, so Paul meets this young man, Timothy. He wants Timothy to go with him to deliver this very letter that we've been talking about, this letter that you can read in Acts chapter 15, this letter to the churches, essentially telling them that circumcision and observing the law of Moses was not a requirement for following Christ. Now, I kind of skipped a part of verse 3. I think it's important that we go back and read it. So let me just read the whole verse of verse 3 for you. Paul wanted Timothy to go with him. So he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews that were in those places, since they all knew that his father was a Greek. What? I mean, so Paul meets this young man, Timothy, right? He says, we're going to go to all these different churches. We're going to spread the news, spread this letter that says circumcision is no longer a requirement to following Jesus. But then he turns around and circumcises him before they go to deliver this letter. What? Now, okay, that may have only been one verse long, not even, like half a verse long, right? But you know there was a discussion that took place there, right? Like if Paul were to say, hey, Timothy, I've got this important mission and journey for God I'm going on, and I'd like for you to come with me. Wow, what an opportunity, Paul. What are we going to do on this journey? Well, I've got this really important letter from the other apostles and elders in Jerusalem. It needs to be shared with the other churches. We made some decisions about church life that need to be shared. Well, that sounds exciting. Yeah, let's go right now. Well, hold on. Before we go, there's something I need you to do first. Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, what do you want me to do? I can do it. Well, I need you to get circumcised. Paul, what's in that letter? Can I read that letter, Paul? No, you cannot. It's for church leaders' eyes only, boy. All right, let's go. Right? I mean, if I were Timothy, I would have fought back against this. Right? I would have said something like this. I would have said, Paul, brother, you and I both know that following Jesus does not mean that I have to get circumcised. You and I both know that we are saved by grace through faith. And now, because I'm in Jesus Christ, I've got these freedoms, I've got these rights, I've got these privileges that all say I don't have to be circumcised. Why are you asking me to be circumcised? And here's what I imagine Paul would say in response to that. love. Love, Timothy. Don't you see that where we're going to deliver these letters to, there are still people who are living under the old covenant. There are still people that your Father in heaven loves, people that Jesus Christ died to save, people who are lost and in need of salvation. And you, Timothy, not being circumcised is going to be a barrier that is going to keep these people from hearing our message. And so, if your Father in heaven loves these people, and if Jesus Christ loved these people to the point of the cross, and if you, Timothy, love these people and want to reach them, you would be willing to tear down any barriers that would get in the way of reaching them. So snip, snip, Timothy. Okay, that was a bad joke. I'm going to start working on my resume now. The lesson here is this, that we see Paul has a deep love for lost people. And he wanted to love them into a relationship with Jesus, and he was willing to do whatever it took to reach them. And as I mentioned earlier, Jesus had a deep love for the world, which includes you and me, and he was willing to do whatever it took to save us all. Earlier, I had mentioned that it's in the gospel we see love in action. But now what we're seeing is that the gospel demands love in action. In the gospel, we see Jesus pursuing us. And once we have accepted him, we now have these freedoms and privileges and rights and an obligation to pursue others with this very message. The gospel demands love in action. And if we're going to love the world like Jesus loved the world, if we're going to display love for the world just like these men displayed for us, Jesus and Paul and Timothy, if we're going to have that type of love, well, it begs the question, what does love look like? What does love look like? And fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know. We don't really have time to go into a 4-hour discourse on what love looks like. But if I could focus it in on something that I believe Christians in our world need to hear today, if I could focus it in on something that I believe Christians here at Sarasota Christian Church, Christians who are listening online, tuning in right now, if I could focus it in to one specific answer, here's what I would say. Love looks like followers of Jesus who are willing to do whatever it takes to tear down any barriers that could prevent the spreading of the gospel. That's long, so I'll repeat it. Love looks like followers of Jesus who are willing to do whatever it takes to tear down any barriers to prevent the spreading, or that could prevent the spreading of the gospel. Now I want to kind of just pause here for a second, and I want us to think about the job of an American ambassador. Their job as U.S. citizens is to bridge the gap between the United States and whatever foreign country they're currently living in, right? I mean, these ambassadors live in those foreign countries, and even though they're still U.S. citizens, they speak the language of the foreign people, right? They eat their food, and they will respect any sort of cultural dress codes that they might have in that particular country or region. Why? Well, because they have an important job, and that job is to build bridges so that the United States and whatever foreign country that is they're working with, right, they can build these bridges to have healthy working relationships between these two countries. These ambassadors have a very important job to do. But we as Christians are ambassadors of a much higher kingdom, the kingdom of God. How much more important of a bridge we must build. And as such, in order to build these bridges between other people and Jesus, sometimes we have to give up our rights and our freedoms in Jesus Christ so that a bridge can be built. Now, clearly in the days of Acts, we see circumcision was a huge deal. But then the Jerusalem Council, they debated and determined that it was unnecessary. But then when it came time to reach the Jewish people with the gospel message, Paul wasn't going to let that be a barrier for them. The Apostle Paul talks about this a little bit further to the Corinthian church. He writes a letter to this church explaining this even further, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He essentially says, to the Jews, I became a Jew so that I could win Jews. And to the Gentiles, I became a Gentile so that I could win Gentiles. And then he kind of concludes this way in verse 22. He says, I have become all things to all people. And listen to the passion behind this next part. So that I may by every possible means save some. Now, I kind of feel like I need to caveat this, so just allow me to get this out of the way, but keep this in mind as we move forward from here. Notice, if you were to go back and read this passage, notice Paul does not say, I became a sinner so that I could save sinners, right? That's not what we're saying here. As a matter of fact, earlier in that passage, Paul says that he is still under the law of Christ. Okay, that's my caveat. Keep that in mind. Right now, in this passage, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul is not addressing circumcision, but he's addressing a different issue, right? In this chapter, he argues that as an apostle of Jesus Christ, that he has the freedom and the right to essentially ask the local church for an income. I mean, as one who's going from town to town, spreading the gospel message, as one who's going from town to town, planting churches in different regions, right? He says that he has the right and the privilege to ask for an income. But he says that he didn't want to exercise that freedom or that right. Well, because look at verse 12. He says, nevertheless, we have not made use of this right. But instead, we endure everything so that we will not hinder the gospel of Christ. Paul wasn't going to ask the Corinthian church for an income because he knew that that was going to be a barrier to gospel growth in that region. And so he laid down that freedom and that right so more people could come to know Christ. Now, my guess is, and I think it's an educated guess, I don't believe circumcision today is probably as much of a barrier to people coming to know Christ as it was back then in the early church days. But that doesn't mean that we Christians don't have barriers worth tearing down for the sake of the gospel. I mean, remember what a barrier is. A barrier separates. A barrier divides. And we Christians can create barriers to the world that keep us from spreading the gospel. For example, how about maybe just strong opinions on whether masks are necessary or not during this pandemic? I mean, could that be a potential barrier for reaching people with the gospel? Absolutely. I mean, if you were one who is strongly opposed to masks, and then let's just say, let's pretend, and I think it's fair to pretend this, that you take this opinion to social media, because that's kind of what lots of people do, right? Let's say you're strongly opposed to masks, and you post your opinion on social media, and then you've got someone in your realm of influence who believes that masks are really, really important during this time. Can I tell you who's not going to invite you over for dinner? You may have just lost any voice to speak the gospel into their lives because of that strong stance that you take on masks. That's one example. And here's another. How about politics? You know, I really only keep my Facebook profile for two reasons. Free picture storage and for work. right? Because every time that I get on Facebook, it seems like I see some sort of political meme or joke or just straight up rude statement about the other party or the other candidates. I mean, when both sides' strategy is to trash the other person's reputation, I think it's fair to say we've got ourselves a divisive issue. And a divisive issue divides. And it's not that masks or politics don't matter. I know that these are important issues, and we need to talk about them, and we need to be involved in our world and in our government so that we can make the world a better place. And it's not that we can't have strong opinions about things. I have very strong opinions about country music and two-step dancing, okay? But we need to be willing to learn when to share those opinions. We need to be willing to learn how to share those opinions. And probably more importantly, we need to be willing to learn when not to share those opinions. So it's not that these things aren't important. They're just of secondary importance. Just to give you kind of a fun extreme to think about, I've got one friend of mine, a pastor friend, whom I love and respect, who does not post anything about sports on social media. Because he would argue that, and let's be honest, we know this to be true, some people get a little invested about their sports teams, right? And he wonders if that might be a potential barrier for spreading the gospel. You at least got to love the way he thinks about what he's posting on social media. Because I think we would all agree sports are of secondary importance when it comes to the gospel. So then let me ask you this, and we'll close with this. What are some barriers that you might be putting up that are keeping you from reaching people with the message of Jesus? Is it a strong opinion that you hold over something that may be of second or even third or fourth or fifth importance? Is it an attitude that needs to change? Is it maybe your comfort level? Maybe not willing to step out of that comfort level to just listen to or spend time with someone who looks or acts or lives differently than you? Or is it a social media post that says, if you love Jesus, share or you're going to hell? Which is funny, but still needs to be said. Jesus had all the rights and the privileges of a king, and yet he gave those up and came to live as a servant. He subjected himself in love to us. And now he sends all of us out on a mission with all the privileges and the rights and the freedoms of God's family, and yet we are called to live in subjection to love and to tear down any barriers that could keep us from fulfilling that mission. And that's our challenge this morning. Today we are answering in part the question, what does love look like? And in part, I believe the answer is love looks like followers of Jesus who are willing to do whatever it takes to tear down any barriers that could possibly prevent the spreading of the gospel. This morning, we're going to enter into a time where we remember Jesus' love in action. We remember his willingness to disrobe from his glory and to walk in our shoes, the creator becoming the created, the king becoming the servant. Why? Because he loved us. And he was willing to do whatever it took to save us and to bring us into his family. So this morning, we're going to remember the cross. We're going to remember Jesus. So during this time, we invite you to take of the Lord's Supper, which is this simple and yet powerful reminder of Jesus' love and action for us. So let's pray together. God, thank you for your radical love that is so deep and so wide. God, I don't think I could ever truly comprehend it. Jesus, thank you for your love. And God, for Jesus, that it wasn't just an attitude that you had towards us, but that it was an action. All the things that you did to show us that you loved us, Jesus. Thank you for that kind of love. Thank you for adopting us into God's family. We love you, Jesus. We remember you and worship you now. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray, and together we say, amen.